If I wasn't taking care of myself as a person while I was being an entrepreneur, the business had no chance of success. Early stage businesses are so dependent on their founders for long-term success that if the founder isn't taking care of himself or herself, you're basically handicapping the business.
TDW fans, we are excited to have Alex Raymond on the show today. Alex is the founder and CEO of Kapta, a company that provides software for post-sales account management professionals. He's a graduate of the prestigious TechStars Accelerator program, a mentor for business leaders and entrepreneurs, and the creator of the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit with the same podcast name. So you got to check out both of those. And the summit is coming up June 4th and 5th. In Boulder, Colorado, entering its third year. And the keynote speaker is none other than Ryan Holiday. So what a catch there, my friend. And if you're like me, you have the Daily Stoic sitting on your nightstand and you consume it constantly, and the obstacle is the way. Alex's work is highly relevant to business leaders and entrepreneurs, and he believes that if you're going to achieve your true business potential, you have to do the deep work. Alex, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much, Nate. Great to see you. Alex, great to be here. Thanks for having me. And yes, doing the deep work is absolutely critical. It's not fun. It's not easy, but it certainly is the path. And yeah, I'm also really excited about having Ryan Holiday come out for this event in Boulder. The reason that I reached out to him and invited him to join us is Stoicism comes up so often when you talk to entrepreneurs. And it was one of these things where I heard his name and I heard references to Stoicism 4, 5, 6, 7 times. I was like, okay, let's do it. Let's make this happen with Ryan Holiday. So yeah, it's exciting.
You have a fantastic network because you were able to pull that off. That couldn't have been easy.
Well, so it turns out that there's, as I'm learning this, because this is the third year doing the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit, there's a whole way of getting in touch with some of these better known people and speakers. And in some cases, you work directly with them. In other cases, you're working with their teams or with their representatives and agents and stuff like that. But I was lucky that someone gave me his Gmail address, and that's how it all began.
Awesome.
I love that story. Alex, a pivotal moment in your business journey occurred at a high point in your career. You and your company were in the illustrious TechStars Accelerator program. Everything looked great on the surface, but by your own admission, you were miserable. You weren't taking care of your physical health. You weren't sleeping. You were feeling depressed, stressed, comparing yourself to other entrepreneurs and leaders, and internalizing issues with your business as a form of personal failure. And I absolutely identify with that as well, at that last point for sure. And now, in search of a better version of yourself, you began a process you described as getting out of your own way, doing this time-consuming, deep personal growth work and exploration when your business was highly demanding and experiencing momentum. Now, this is critical because for most business leaders, this feels like a binary choice, right? I can focus on my career growth, or I can focus on my personal growth. I don't have time for both, but you believe that we can't have one without the other. Talk to us about your journey and why slowing down to go inwards is the ultimate business hack.
It's a total false equivalence. So people say, oh, I can't do both. Or they'll say, oh, yeah, I'll do all this stuff once I get the business taken care of, or once I get this out of the way, type of idea. And that's total nonsense. The only way to really set yourself up for success in the long term is to do what it takes to be the best possible version of yourself, to be the best possible human. Basically, postponing that or not putting priority to that does nothing other than accrue compound interest over time. And for me, I'll tell you the story. I was at TechStars. This is a long time ago, like 2014. And I was at TechStars. For people who don't know, TechStars is this. It's an accelerator program for startups. And at the time, we were doing the program here in Boulder, Colorado, which is where I live. And we were going through the program. It's really competitive to get into. They have something like a 1% acceptance rate or something like that. So it's a big deal. And there's a lot of support. There's a lot of resources. It's a really great program for getting a business off the ground. And one day after the program, one evening, I was back home and I was sitting at the kitchen table, just like looking like a mope, right? and just like frown on my face, grumpy, whatever it is. And this is one of these like, oh, man, I'm so grateful for my wife moments, because she looks at me and she's like, you are supposed to be in literally the pinnacle of your career. You've been working on this for years. You finally got into this fancy program. Everybody's got your back. Everybody's rooting for you. Why are you so fucking miserable? Like, fair question, right? Like, and I was like, oh, like, yes, why? And so, this is a version of tough love, right? So she's like, hey, like, sort the stuff out, like, get out of your own way here. And I was doing exactly what you were saying there, Alex. I was spending all my time comparing myself to others. Like, oh, these people, they raise more money than we did. They're growing faster than we are. Oh, whatever. They have a better website design than we do. All this sort of external stuff. And it was zapping my energy. And I was sitting there kind of really getting caught up in comparing myself to others. And we all know comparison is the thief of joy. And this was happening to me there.
Compare and despair. Compare and despair.
Totally. So I was comparing and despairing. I was feeling like I didn't belong. Right. So this is sometimes called imposter syndrome. The idea of like, hey, how did I get invited here? How did I make it through this process? Everyone else is such fancy, serious, badass people. What am I doing in the room? And that was really like starting to weigh me down. And after my wife's encouragement, what I really did was started just opening the box of tools. So what can I do to make sure that I'm taking care of myself, that I'm setting the right frameworks in my mind, the right mental models in my mind, that I'm having the right amount of spiritual, mental, emotional well-being, right? Physical well-being is part of this journey. So I went out and I did literally all the things. I did the meditation retreats. I did the watch the videos, read the books, go here, go there, like all of it, men's group, Vistage, EO, all these types of things to try to figure out, what's out there and what's available. Some of the things worked and I gravitated more toward them. Some of them weren't quite for me, and that's totally fine. But I did all that stuff realizing that if I wasn't taking care of myself as a person while I was being an entrepreneur, the business had no chance of success, right? Early stage businesses are so dependent on their founders for long-term success that if the founder isn't taking care of himself or herself, you're basically handicapping the business. The idea that like, oh, I'll do this later, or I don't have time for this, is such utter nonsense, because if you're not doing it now, you're simply setting yourself up for failure later. And every hour that I spend working on myself, every dollar I spend working on myself just pays off tenfold. And I've even gone so far as to start to think about this exactly to your question, as the difference between the JV team and the varsity team. And so let me explain. When I talk to people and they're in this like JV mindset, they're like, oh, I don't know. Like, especially, for example, in the context of the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit, which we'll get into in a sec, right? They're like, oh, I don't know. Can I really take 2 days out of my business and go to this event? And like, do I have to sit there and listen to all these talks on, whatever it is, meditation, mindfulness, or stoicism, and so on? It's like, it doesn't sound like, something that's really important for my business. It doesn't sound urgent. That's how a lot of people in the JV team are thinking and talking. And then we talk to the people on the varsity team. And these are, oddly enough, many of the people on stage, right? So they're on stage, meaning they've, built great companies or created amazing cultures or raised a lot of money or been very successful in some external way. And they all say the exact same thing. They all say, you can't get here without doing the internal work. So for example, last year we had some incredible people up on the stage. Godard Abel from G2, Yang Kim from Winolo, Vlada Bortnik from Marco Polo, Anna Goodmanson from Sense8. These are people who are creating very interesting, very serious, very successful businesses. In total, they had raised almost $500 million for their companies. Now that's just an external indicator of stuff. Like we're not like worshiping the money side of things, but what we are doing is saying, as a general indicator of like, are these serious people or not? The answer is yes. And they're all up there on stage saying, this is the path. Like, this isn't something that we did after we got successful or after we had our exit or after whatever it was. We did this, and that allowed us to create the companies and the lives that we want.
Why does it seem like that we don't do that until we have the crash? Why does it seem like that's what it takes for any business leader to go, oh, I'm falling apart. My life's falling apart. My marriage is falling apart. I don't know my kids. I've got a chronic health issue, whatever it is. And then we go, maybe I should care about my well-being.
We do put it off. We do put it off. I think we spend so much time chasing these external indicators of success, and that we don't think for ourselves like, hey, what do I really want? Where am I coming from? What are the things that I can do with my time and energy and talents? And when I externalize all that stuff, it just chips away at my well-being. It chips away at my sense of being even. And then it comes to the point where, there's something that's trying to come through and some energy or something that's wanting to be born or manifest out there. And all we're doing is just like layering on all this stuff, externalized nonsense over the course of many years. That's what causes the burnout. That's what causes the crash, is like a dislocation between where I am and where I really want to be. And then I think it takes, for a lot of us, it takes that wake-up call, because we've been socialized to believe that success is external, that we have to follow the rules, that we have to do what everybody else is doing, and for many, many, many people, that's not what is native to them. It's not what they actually believe.
I love this conversation, and I want to build a little bit on what Nate was just probing on, which is this idea of the threshold for pain, right? And I always say that pain has been my greatest teacher in my life. When I am in pain, when I'm on my belly, not when I'm standing on my own 2 feet, I find myself to be rather more teachable than when I'm standing on my own 2 feet. And I've been sober for almost 17 years. And when you go to AA, there's a pamphlet that's like, are you an addict? Are you an alcoholic? Are you struggling with addiction? It has all these questions. It's a diagnostic, right? So I'm kind of wondering, in a desire to help people avoid that maximum pain point, those things that Nate spoke about, losing your business, losing your marriage, not knowing your kids, whatever it may be. Are there some diagnostic questions that you put out beyond the symptoms? Because what you described were a lot of symptoms, right? You were malnourished, you weren't sleeping well, you were dealing with all these various symptoms of how you were showing up. But are there questions that people should start with to say, hey, is it time now?
The things that I always orient toward, the tools which I can share here for you, are either values-based. So there's a lot of values-based discussion of like, how well do I truly understand where my motivations come from, where my desires come from? And so for a lot of entrepreneurs, the desires or the values are related to freedom, creativity. Those are usually the top two for entrepreneurs. And then things like growth can also be in there. And so understanding what your values are and being very clear on that can help to be a guide for you. So you may notice, when I do things that are aligned with my values, then it gives me energy and I feel good and I want to keep doing more of it. When I do things that are not aligned with my values, I feel like, energy draining, or this isn't for me, or, just kind of feel more blah. And so those are great questions. It's a great exercise. So there's a book by John DeMartini called The Values Factor, on figuring out what your values are and how to articulate those. And I've done that exercise. And every time I find myself going closer to the things that I care about, then energy goes up. Every time I find myself going farther away, energy goes down. Another tool that is really, really interesting is within the work of Dr. Gay Hendricks. Now, Gay Hendricks is the guy who came up with the whole notion of zone of genius. So zone of genius is, what is it that I'm uniquely gifted at doing in the world? What is, basically, why am I here? Put it that way. What is the work I can do that doesn't feel like work? What are the activities that I would do whether I was being paid or not? What are the things that my family and friends come to me for? What do they come to ask me about, for example? Those are all examples of energy giving. And zone of genius is one of these things where once you really tap into it and you realize, hey, I can operate at this level all the time, then that unlocks a tremendous amount of good feeling, positive energy for you. The opposite is also true. If you're stuck in what he calls your zone of competence, your zone of incompetence, or even what he calls your zone of excellence, you find yourself pushing a rock up a hill. You find yourself wearing yourself down over time. So those are great tools and questions that we can start asking ourselves. What do I really, truly care about? And how do I find and operate in my zone of genius? If you do that, you're not going to solve every problem you might have, but you're at least going to start to get closer to the answers.
And that is interesting right now because so much has changed. Like if you said that 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, that would be one thing. But when you look at the last 4 years and how dramatically life has shifted, it's a really important time to step back and go, what does matter to me now?
You're talking about pandemic, like yeah, I mean, for sure. So the COVID pandemic recalibrated everybody's views on what to take seriously. And there's so much change in work, the changes between sort of the corporate contract, if you will, and what work means to people is also changed. And so figuring this stuff out is really just incredibly important. So I always love just going to values. I love trying to stay in the zone of genius. Those are things that really help me for sure.
I love it.
This is really great, Alex. And I just want to say, I don't want to spend much time on this other than a footnote, but I want to say that Nate and I have gone through a lot of our own dark nights of the soul and building this business and figuring out what it's going to be. We both do a lot of personal work on ourselves. We both help men and coach men. Nate does some amazing work in Global Youth Leadership Summit. And so we give back a lot as well. But that journey to how do you sustain yourself through being an entrepreneur, through being a founder, through being a business leader, and I don't think this is, exclusive to entrepreneurs. I think business leaders face a lot of these challenges as well. And we know that's a big part of our audience. And so I think there's an incredible amount of value in kind of looking at this moment of converging personal and professional development and re-examining how can we go inward to find a more sustainable way of being.
Well, so one of the things that people always talk about is coaching, right? And coaching as a vehicle for this. And the obvious comparison that gets used a lot is professional athletes or very high level athletes. And you think of someone like LeBron James, for example, in basketball, and you think, wow, he's so talented, such a talented person. And he's so amazing on the court. Well, think about what happens to him off court. How many coaches he has? He has a sleep coach, a nutrition coach, a rest coach, a shooting coach, a dribbling coach. He probably has a PR and media coach.
Sure.
All this type of stuff. And so this is someone who is naturally incredibly talented, right? Has tons of energy, has tons of charisma, has got tons of internal resources, and also is smart enough to know that I need coaching and assistance with all these other areas of my life in order to perform at my best. And so, Alex, if you're talking about, be it an entrepreneur or be it someone who's a leader in a company, and we're not looking at the whole holistic 360 degrees of the person to say, what areas do I need help in? And how do I make sure that I'm fully supported across all of those? Then they're selling themselves short, or rather they're shooting too low compared to where they might be.
Let's take that limiting belief and just extrapolate it a little bit. So there is a lot of limiting beliefs in there. I don't need to focus on my personal development. Personal development doesn't matter to being a leader. It's those two things are just separate. We don't even talk about that. Organizations don't need to invest in deeper personal work for their leadership team. Like there's a lot of limiting beliefs in the water. What are some of the most or least helpful limiting beliefs that you've run into with even whether that's in the conference or your podcast or just your time in the work?
I spent a lot of time investigating both my own and other people's limiting beliefs, and there's a lot of them. They come down to a fairly small number of themes, but really at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff is just left over from our childhood and from when we were being socialized. And we don't question them, and we don't come back and say, is this true? Is this really true? Because at the end of the day, most limiting beliefs don't survive the light of day, right? Because they're not, they might have been true 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it is, but they don't survive the light of day. And they manifest for many people in the form of an extremely vocal inner critic. So I've got an inner critic who is going to tell me all the things I did wrong today, all the ways I messed up, all the ways I'm insufficient. And that is typically referred to as the superego sort of doing its job, right? So the superego is, we assume, is there to keep us safe when we're children, and then just kind of hangs out and overstays its welcome by several decades. When I work with my own limiting beliefs, the major one for me that comes up is I'm not worthy. So I'm not worthy, for me, is the one that hits the most. And it's got lots of different flavors and it appears in many different ways, but that's the underlying feeling. Now, does that survive if I then ask the question or shine a light on it or dig deeper? No, but it's something that pops up. It's sort of like the first go-to answer, right? It's the instinct. And so me understanding that I'm not worthy is the sort of primal fear, if you will, then lets me to hopefully deal with it in a positive way when it comes up. I certainly do not catch it all the time, right? Not at all, but maybe 25% of the time when it comes up, I am able to intercept it, and that gets better every week and every month. I get a little bit better at it. But so that's a really critical one, right? It's for people is I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable is another one. There's something wrong, like I'm somehow fundamentally flawed or broken. I don't have the skills. These are all the types of things. Again, to go back to the work of Gay Hendricks, he talks about these as being what he calls upper limit problems. So the upper limit is basically I smack right into my limiting belief. And then the question is, am I willing to live with this ceiling, or am I willing to, or am I wanting to break through it to kind of go above that limiting belief? So things there include if I shine or if I excel, I might be being somehow disloyal to a family story of mine, right? So maybe I have a family story. So here's another one that comes up for me, okay? For me, I've got this family story that like suffering is really noble, right? I mean, so I've got this thing, I had a grandfather who came over to the US from Ireland when he was 19 years old and, worked like crazy and all this sort of stuff to create a life here for his family and so on. And it's kind of created this idea that suffering is noble for us, right? And therefore, if I allow myself to get too easy, if everything is suddenly, easy street for me, am I being disloyal to that foundational story of my family? So those are really interesting things. And these come up all the time, right? So these come up not just for me, but for lots of other people. Maybe some people will say, oh, if I excel too much, I'm going to be outshining my older sibling, my older brother or sister, and I can't do that, right? For example, or if I do something really well, then I'll be outshining my parents, and that's totally not allowed here, for example. So these are all the ways that we hold ourselves back, right? We pull ourselves back from doing this stuff. So you can find your upper limits in lots of different ways, right? So meditation or group work or therapy or coaching, what have you. There's lots of ways to do it. And what a lot of people think, or at least what I used to think was like, oh, all I need to do is like identify them, and then I'll just take out the eraser and erase them off, and then I'll be done with it. Of course, that's not even close to it. It's like once I start to figure it out, then I realize it's going to be a decades-long process to live with them and figure out how to deal with them. They certainly don't go away on their own.
Okay, two distinctions I want to grab onto right there that I think are really critical for everyone is one, when you find these limiting beliefs and you surface them, it doesn't mean they're just going to go away magically. And then Alex has this thing that he loves to talk about is this idea of unlearning. But the reality is, while you're elevating your consciousness, while you're elevating your well-being and your potential and your purpose and all these things, you're still going to have these show up at different intervals. So there is an idea of unlearning. I am elevating, but also it doesn't just mean it magically goes away. Is that right?
It doesn't. And in fact, sometimes it come back stronger because, maybe it feels exposed. So there's a lot of this has to do with dealing with the inner critic, because everybody's got an inner critic. And when the superego feels threatened, it goes into overdrive. Like it doesn't just go away. It doesn't just vanish. And so there's a whole process. I'm just reading this really cool book by Neil Allen, where it's called Better Days, where he talks about how to deal with your inner critic. And this is all about having that exact conversation. What to do when it blows up, and basically talk it down, cool it off, let it agree to take a few days off, type of thing. But they do not magically go away. And a lot of people will make a mistake here. They'll make a mistake of saying, well, I went so far as to identify them, but that's it. And we have to go through them. We have to go through them. We have to figure out how to work with them. We have to figure out how to unlearn them if we're really going to get out and reach our potential.
I know that Michael Singer and his book, The Untethered Soul, is a book that you admire. It's one of my favorite books. And
It's a great book.
one thing that Michael says is that if the voice in your head was a roommate, you would have kicked them out, years ago.
Yeah, totally.
And the idea that we all have, not you, that we all have this constant talk track in our head, and trying to listen to it from a place of authenticity, from a place of values, from a place of the version of ourself that we want to be, not, the little me that we all have inside from childhood or from conditioning. It's really, really powerful stuff, Alex. Thank you. Yeah.
The way that we talk to ourselves is completely insane. I would never
Yeah.
talk to anyone. I would never talk to anyone the way that I talk to myself. And yet I allow myself to do this, right? I do it on the inside. And so guess what? Like, this is not a recipe for a good life right here. The recipe for the good life is to not believe all your thoughts. Don't believe everything that your mind is saying to you.
I honestly, this is a really weird, and this is probably going to horrify some people, but a really weird business idea. I genuinely believe if someone can figure out how to get that inner critic out and you could hear it out loud as a technology and it could play back the kind of noise that's inside the head, I think that would be a tremendous service. It'd be scary as hell, but it would open that conversation in a completely new way for humanity. And for everyone that I just freaked out, I apologize.
Let's see if you can build that.
Alex, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, a whopping 90% of startups fail, and you are in the 10%, a successful entrepreneur who has beat the odds. So you are worthy, my friend. And you've coached a lot of other startup founders, and we're curious to know, what's the first piece of advice that you give them?
So you're referring to our company Kapta. It has been going for a long time. It is successful. We did manage to defy all the odds and to create a business. In addition to going through the TechStars program, as you mentioned, I also do a lot of mentoring with other CEOs and founders who are earlier on. And everyone's trying to figure out how do I make sure this thing works? What are the secrets? What's the recipe, so to speak? And the answer is there's not all that much commonality between one business and the other, so it's hard to put together kind of like a playbook. It's hard to say here's the playbook for making this work. A lot of it comes down to some really critical skills as an entrepreneur. Probably the most important one is simply curiosity, and curiosity means I am aware of the fact that the answers are not inside the building. I need to go out there and determine, what do people care about? What does the market think? How is the market behaving? That is going to allow me to decide where I go as a company. We do all this stuff that's on the kind of like inside out. We start with the idea like, oh, I have this idea. Let me go then like figure out what hole does my peg fit in, sort of thing. As opposed to, hey, I've got a broad idea here. I think it solves this type of problem for this type of person, but I don't really know the specifics about it. Let me go talk to them and see, am I on the right track? So this is what Steve Blank would call the customer discovery process. How do I go out there and really understand and figure out what it is that they need? So in startup language, this is also called product market fit. How do I get to product market fit? Meaning a point where the needs of the market intersect with the features or benefits of my product in a way that everybody is winning. It's really easy to capture these concepts and to say, oh, all I need to do is get the product market fit. And the truth is that will then shift and evolve over time based on things that are completely outside of your control. So another critical skill, therefore, of the entrepreneur is to be really clear about what's inside and what's outside of your control. And we tend to get way too stressed out of things that we have nothing to do with, that we cannot impact in any way. And we therefore tend to sometimes underrepresent the things that we can control and figure out what those decisions are. So those are frameworks that I've always used. Is we don't know the answers. We have to go find the answers. We have to get as close to reality as we can. And the reality is defined by the market. Reality is not defined by what I think it should be. And then, so it's absolutely critical for us to do that. And then make sure that we are being open to what's coming in and understanding what's inside my control that I can do something about, and what are things that I need to work around or work with that are definitely not in my control.
Corporate America has been fascinated with that kind of thinking because it's very different, right? In a traditional organization, you're kind of doing what you do and your status quo, and maybe you have some continuous improvement. A lot of corporations wouldn't call themselves innovative. And then what you're talking about is a really different way to look at how you approach a product, a technology, a service. So what should modern business leaders be learning from founders and entrepreneurs?
The big conversation is around disruption and innovation, and everyone thinks that there could be some disruptive competitor just around the corner that I haven't thought of yet, and so on. And the answer to that is yes, of course there are. And if we're not spending enough time in the field, out with our customers, understanding where are they going, what are they trying to solve? If my entire lens is simply how do I sell more widgets, how do I sell more of my service, how do I get people to consume what I've already built, then I'm really limiting my potential. I'm saying this is my field of view, this is my field of operations, as opposed to what could be out there. So a lot of the disruptions simply come from insights that people have about consumer behavior or what a customer is trying to accomplish versus what is currently being offered today. So most part, that's the critical skill here, is the curiosity, the openness, the willingness to listen, right? Those are all going to take you very, very far. No matter if you're in a startup or if you're in a more mature company, just simply being able to do that is going to be extremely helpful.
I absolutely love that answer, Alex. And I want to pivot to something else that we also feel that corporate leaders struggle with and that entrepreneurs do as well, which is how to talk about themselves and how to promote themselves. And you do this incredibly well on LinkedIn. You've got 25,000 followers. That's incredibly impressive. A lot of executives aren't paying attention to LinkedIn or really making the time to build their brand, their voice, their thought leadership. Why is this worth it to you? Why is this investment worth it to you? And how did you go about getting to 25,000 followers?
LinkedIn in particular is such a powerful tool. I use it a ton. I use it for my business, all my business, a lot, and I get a really lot of value on it. And it can be confusing for a lot of people because they start out and it just looks like a lot of noise. And these days there's a lot of outsourced kind of like knowledge bro posts, I will call them. I'm sure you've seen these things where it's like, this fisherman from Sicily created an $18 billion business and you've never heard of her before. And here's the playbook that she used to get there. So first of all, let me just be very clear. Those are all being outsourced to companies. Okay. So there are companies who go and they say, we'll help you do your personal branding. And so when we write the article on, whatever it is, the underwear entrepreneur or the bicycle entrepreneur, those things, like, these are not personal points of view, right? I don't do those. I don't like those. I don't think those are great use of people's time and energy. Like, if I want that, I'll go look at Wikipedia or I'll ask, ChatGPT, and I will get to ChatGPT in a second. First of all, most important is to think of this as a vehicle for expressing my thoughts. So I use it as a vehicle for expressing my thoughts. I use it as a vehicle for expressing a point of view. So that's important, is to say what's different in how I view the world, or what are the things that I might share with people that they haven't thought of before, or what are the status quo things that we might want to reframe. So having a point of view is going to help. It's going to help you create a conversation, and that's what gets the followers. The end goal here is not to get followers. The end goal is to get clear on what are your thoughts, what do you stand for? Kind of like I was saying at the beginning, like, what's your value or what's your zone of genius? Like, those are the things that we ultimately want to be doing. Another very important part of this equation is adding value throughout. So as you go, are your posts for you, or are your posts for the audience? And you want to do as much as you can posting for the audience. Even if you're promoting something of your own, even if you've got some idea that you're trying to get out there, how can you make the consumption of this post be for the audience? And so that's something that a lot of people don't do, right? I see a lot of, especially in the sales world, a lot of chief revenue officers, a lot of VPs of sales, just like, look at how cool we are, buy our new thing, right? Or like, we're going to be at this conference, come to our booth. And it's like, I don't know, is this actually valuable? Is this meaningful for me? Am I going to do anything based on that? As opposed to, you might say, instead of buy our thing, you might say, over the last 18 months, we've talked to 600 CMOs, and we found out that these three things are incredibly important to them, A, B, and C. And as a result, right, we decided to create this particular thing, which we think has the potential to revolutionize your business and save 15% on your whatever it is, right? Okay, like that's meaningful. It's still promotional, but it's also educational and meaningful to me. And again, instead of just we're going to be at the conference, come to our booth, it could be something entirely different. Like, hey, we've now unpacked a series of trends of things that are happening for this audience. We'd love to share our most recent insights with you at, 2 p.m. on Tuesday at our booth. Okay, more meaningful. And so, am I always adding value? Do I have a point of view on stuff, and am I adding value? So I mentioned earlier that there's these companies that outsource your personal brand for you, and they all kind of look alike. By the way, another version of this, as you've probably seen on LinkedIn, this has been very popular in the last 3 months, like a handwritten sort of note, like table or handwritten note on like the 10 things that every successful trillionaire does before 6 a.m. And they're all like written out in like paper, and like the guy's holding up his notebook. Those are also done by a company. None of these are coming from the person. The entrepreneur whose picture it is not doing this stuff. So I just want to like disabuse your entire audience of the fact that like, wow, that guy is so busy and he still put together this handwritten note and put it on LinkedIn. No, he didn't. He outsourced that. But at least those people have a fairly high quality standard. For real, they have a high quality standard. Like it's generally interesting stuff. The trap that everyone's falling into now is ChatGPT, right? Like, oh, hey, cool. I can now write, 2 sentences and ChatGPT will miraculously create a 6-paragraph post for me on this stuff. And that's all right in theory. And yes, you can be more efficient doing it that way and stuff like that. But what's the result? The result is it's so same. And I wrote a post a few weeks ago on some of the telltale signs that I've seen in these AI generated posts. So like, what is it that ChatGPT repeats over and over and over again? And it was really interesting because I just started listing out the things that I thought, and then everybody piled on with the things that they see in ChatGPT. So there's no soul in those posts. Yes, they take up space. Yes, they're, 400 words, but there's no meaning to them. And so for people who are trying to get their name out there, for people who are trying to become known, for people who are trying to explore an idea, being open is important. Being vulnerable. There's a lot of what people are calling building in the open, right, or building in public these days. And that's all about being open and vulnerable and sharing what you're learning along the way. Those are really valuable posts. So I like that one. The other things like over-indexing on AI or over-indexing on ChatGPT, those are simply not going to work. So it's an energetic topic for me. Let me put it that way.
Well, let's just put a point on this, a bottom line. Can leaders, whether you're an entrepreneur or a corporate leader, can you just ignore this? Is it okay to just ignore this?
You've got to go where the conversation's happening, right? So
Okay.
You've got to be at the beach, at the swimming pool. You got to be where the people are. So if you're trying to ignore it, it's not going to work. Some people find different vehicles. Okay, so other vehicles are people who have Substack newsletters, for example, or people who have Medium blogs. Like those are other places that you can go, but you have to be in a place where a conversation is happening. Some people are on TikTok or Instagram or what have you. If you want to make yourself known, if you want to have your idea get out there, you've got to be in these communal spaces.
Get in the game. You got to get in the game.
Yeah, you got to get in the game. Yeah.
Okay. Here's a hustle culture question. You have put hustle culture on trial. Alex and I put hustle culture on trial. But there's an interesting distinction that's emerged. In the AI era, you can't out-hustle the algorithm. So for the first time, we're kind of going, wow, AI is in our hands, generative AI is in our hands, and we're interacting with it in a completely different way. And it is giving us huge efficiencies. We're more productive. And the deeper you get into it, the more you realize how powerful this is. And it's kind of changing the relationship with hustle culture, or is it? What are your thoughts?
I'm certainly no AI expert, and I can't believe that my insights are going to be substantially better than anyone else's or newer than anyone else's out there because there's so much conversation happening around this. The issue with hustle culture is I have a deep-seated belief that I have to work myself to the bone, that I've got to burn the candle at both ends in order to be fill in the blank. Happy, successful, rewarded, recognized, whatever. That at the end of the day is what hustle culture is all about. And it gets reflected in things like glorification of the hero stories of entrepreneurs and over focusing on very small number of incredibly successful people and celebrity culture and all that kind of stuff. And so AI in many ways is simply accelerating that for people and making us wanting to do more, able to do more, and therefore may not be helping us with the work smarter thing as opposed so much as we're just able to do more stuff and potentially at a lower quality with less interesting points of view, like I was saying before. So I think, at least in the current versions, that's the biggest issue with AI is it's generating all sorts of like fairly mediocre readable stuff as opposed to anything that's really compelling and awesome.
I think this is such a fascinating conversation around hustle culture. It's something that we've all felt, certainly working in the world of digital transformation and startup culture in New York for years. That's, all you heard, hustle hard. Nate was using the phrase, rise and grind. We've talked about a lot. And that this was your metric of how successful you were in a lot of ways. It's what you were putting out into the world. I'm successful because I'm hustling.
Scott Galloway said that on that conference call we were on, and he goes, I was the first one in the building and the last one to leave. And that was something to be proud of.
Yeah. And that's something that is changing. And that's something, again, that, you've put on trial, we put on trial, which is great, but it's also causes a reimagining of, so what is success now? What does that look like? If hustle culture isn't the metric for success, that's an old measuring stick. The measuring stick in a lot of ways for success is broken. So how has it changed? How do you see unhealthy versus healthy success now in leadership and entrepreneurs in business?
A lot of people are having a crisis around this topic because, like we were just talking about before, there's so much has changed during the pandemic. The pandemic really helped us to understand what's important and what's not important out there because we were all of a sudden very aware of our own physical health, right? And the limitations of our own health. And so that meant that a lot of people were sort of jettisoning hustle culture or the idea of just burning the candle at both ends and working all night. What I've been seeing for a lot of people in this conversation is moving to impact. What is the impact that I'm able to have in many different areas of my life? So I talk about this as sort of 4 pillars. When I talk about conscious entrepreneur, I talk about 4 pillars. I talk about the conscious you. So what are you doing individually yourself? So what are the commitments that you've made to yourself as an individual? That's number 1. Number 2 is the team or basically your closest circle around you. Could be team, family, spouse, those kind of core sets of relationships. That's the second pillar. Third pillar is company. So how is this manifesting within my company or how is this being implemented within my company? And the fourth one is how is it inspiring the world? And so you can think of impact on those 4 levels and across those 4 different pillars. And so people are using that framework to think, hey, what am I doing for myself? What am I doing for those closest around me? How am I contributing to my company? How am I contributing to the broader world? That seems to be something that is catching people's attention right now. It's part of the zeitgeist here in 2024. Impact is much more on people's minds rather than what can I extract or what can I get? At least that's what I'm seeing. Does that resonate with you guys?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's how, Alex, how we've built this. The disrupted workforce exists because we saw an opportunity for people to have a broader conversation about how fast things are changing, that work's never going to be the same again. And it's important for us to talk about this. Alex and I were like, let's just give it away. Let's just make it available to everyone so we all can learn and grow together.
So it's impact and contribution, right? So this is your contribution to the world.
And a forcing function for both Nate and myself to stay really current in this conversation around what is disrupted work, what is the future of AI in business, what does humanity and being human look like in this digital era, in this increasingly digital world. These are things that we really wanted to explore. And so by putting this out into the world, we're forced to constantly play in that sandbox and have conversations with folks like yourself.
Alex, your Conscious Entrepreneur Summit is coming up on June 4th and 5th in Boulder, Colorado. You can attend in person or virtually. And it's fantastic. This is a fantastic event, and you have these great keynote speakers lined up, and you're having this really important conversation. But what would you say to people who've never heard of this, and you have this moment to say to them, this is why this conference exists, this is why it matters, and here's how you can get the most out of it?
The tagline that I use for the conference is scale your business without sacrificing yourself. Because we all think that, as we were just talking about, I've got to just go to the bone and just be totally burned out in order to get a business off the ground. And what I want to do is show you that that's not true. There are ways to create a successful, profitable business for the long term while staying happy, married, sane, and healthy, and all the things that you want in your life. And for the most part, it simply has to do with reframing some mindsets, reframing some old beliefs that you have that probably don't serve you anymore, and getting inspiration and connection from the community. And so we spend a lot of time creating this event that's not just amazing speakers, and it is. You can see the list, but it's a lot of really successful entrepreneurs, people who are building incredible companies, a lot of CEOs. And so it's not just that content piece, it's also the community piece, meaning the group of peers that you are around, meaning the idea of like, this is what people like us do. Like, this is what we do. We get together and we support one another, and we are creating ways to redefine success and to be super supportive of one another. So the program itself is a 2-day event, takes place in Boulder on June 4th and 5th, like you were saying. We're going to have about 300 people there this year. And just for this group, we actually created a discount code just for listeners of this podcast. So if everyone goes on over to consciousentrepreneur.us, that's the website. And I know that those are two words that are hard to spell. So just put it in Google, Conscious Entrepreneur, it'll get you there. Consciousentrepreneur.us, use the code TDW, and that'll get everybody $100 off their ticket. So it's really tremendous event. I love it. The feedback is so positive. And, we've seen people come and implement these ideas. We've seen them get inspired. We've seen people learn to love their companies again, because we know that sometimes there's a falling out for entrepreneurs. They fall out of love with their companies, and we're all about helping them find that inspiration.
Come and find your tribe at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit. Alex, we're going to take you into a speed round. You have 60 seconds or less to answer each question, and just go with your gut. And Alex Schwartz is going to kick us off.
You've lived and traveled all over the world. How have those experiences shaped your leadership?
I've had a tremendous opportunity to live and work all over the place. I've lived about 20 years of my life outside of the US. And, this, for me, it's a source of joy, and it's a source of connection. We tend to focus way too much on like where we are, and maybe close our eyes or close our minds to what's out there, to the big, beautiful world that we live in. And I'm just so grateful that I've had the opportunity to see a lot of it, to make friends in lots of places. So one of my number one encouragements for everyone is get out of your zip code and go out there and see the world.
At this phase in your career, what do you want your legacy to be?
The number one word that comes up for me when I think about that, Nate, is contribution. And I want to feel like I'm contributing to my community, to my society, and to my world. One of the values that I hold very dear is the value of helping other people grow, helping other people to experience new things. And to me, that's a form of contribution. So that's very much what I hope that I'm remembered for.
Last speed round question. We are huge Viktor Frankl fans. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and there is a quote we absolutely love. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In those choices lie our growth and freedom. What does this quote mean to you?
To me, the space that he's referring to is essentially being human. And this is where we can see what's happening in the world, what's going on, what am I aware of, and what am I going to do about it. And so I can see what's in my control, I can see what's not in my control, and I can see how is it that I want to show up in the world.
Alex, thank you for leading with honesty, vulnerability, and a desire to help your fellow leaders and entrepreneurs, for your 4-pillar framework, which is deeply resonant for us, and I'm sure your audience. You are inviting a very different set of behaviors, values, and ways of being into startup culture, which can be very alpha male, focused on growth at all costs, and where culture can be an afterthought. And this is a big deal and very important work.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. Really appreciate the conversation.
One last thing, where can people find you, or where's the best place for people to find you online?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, very easy to find there. Just search Alex Raymond, and I'm sure I'll pop up.
I'm also going to put a plug for the consciousentrepreneur.us. Go there and check out Alex's podcast as well. It's fantastic.